Hi, everyone. We're here for Talk It Up Tuesdays and super excited about the topic. This is Women's History Month, and so I'm here with our Executive Director, Wendy Hanna, to talk about some inspiring women. Welcome, Wendy.
Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you.
So before we get started, I will just take a few minutes and tell a little bit about the Turning Point. So we serve survivors of sexual violence here in the North Texas area. And our mission is to provide advocacy, counseling, and education. And let me see if I can pull up our hotline number here. So our hotline, we've got trained advocates available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that telephone number is 1-800-886-7273. Great. So welcome, Wendy.
Hello.
So I wanted to get started, and this is one of my favorite times because I love hearing stories of inspiring women and who other people find inspiring. So I wondered if you could share maybe from your childhood, if there was a certain woman or figure, a historical figure that moved you or made you excited.
Sure. I was thinking about this question. When I was growing up, I wasn't really thinking about who inspires me and aspiring to be anyone in particular. I think like most young girls, at least who I was around, I just spent most of my time trying to navigate my world and get through school and figure out what I wanted to do or be when I grow up, right? But there's always been two women that stand out in my life, and I get real emotional talking about them, but one of them was my best friend's mother, and we called her Scrappy Bergeron. And to this day, I'm trying to remember. I need to call Ann, and I can never remember Scrappy's first name, but she was our school counselor. But she was my best friend, who was my best friend since second grade's mother, and she was really, I had a good mom, but it was a difficult relationship, and her mother just was a safe haven for me and was never judgmental, very progressive, ahead of her time and in her views. And so we would sit and talk about things that just women don't talk about generally back in the, 70s and 80s. And she was who I went to I can remember every pivotal moment in my life. If I needed to talk to somebody, I would go to Scrappy's house with Ann, and I'd say, I need to get a frozen yogurt. That was big in the day. We'd drive around and go get a frozen yogurt. And she would never tell me what to do. She would just help me find the solution. It was just inspirational. Honestly, and you think back, I remember losing her. It was just such a jolt because, you move away, you have kids and you grow up, and it was a real jolt to my system. And I think as I've gotten older, I've missed her more and more, right? Because you think, what have I missed out on all those years? And then my other one was my great Aunt Jo Million. I actually can't see it out of the background. I have a picture of her, but my great Aunt Jo Million was just a firecracker. She, was 84 when she died, and I was in college. And so that was the age difference. But, I did not have a good relationship with my grandmother, who my parents shipped us off to every summer, and she lived in a small town close by, and I got to stay with her in this 2-bedroom house. And she was single and worked as the county city clerk's office in Payne County, Oklahoma, forever, and just never went anywhere without having little kitten heels and had red wigs. Like, I always had to go over on Saturdays, and I always said I was going to write a book, said Miss Million and her wigs, because I'd have to drive her to the parlor, right, and load these foam heads in the back. And she just was a kid, she just lived life large, and I was in college and didn't know what was going on. And I actually, part of why I went to school at OSU is because that was the town she lived in, and I got to be there with her and spend her last days with her. But just the other day, my dad found a little note in her handwriting and gave it to me. We were going through stuff, and it just brought back all these memories. And it was the funniest note about, hey, Bill, that's her nephew. If I die, I want you to just remember 2 things. I don't want a big fuss, don't want a bunch of people. Of course, I'm going to be dead, so I can't bug you about it. And then the other thing is put a red wig on my head. And I was just make sure it's a good wig. Wendy knows the good wig. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. So those are probably anytime I'm thinking about who I am as a person, I can't think about that without thinking of them.
I think I really resonate with that as well, because as a child, I don't think I had these great heroes either, but it's those relationships that,
Yeah.
an influential teacher or, a
Yeah.
family friend. Yeah. So I really relate to that as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But I will say for me, one difference might be is that I loved like characters out of storybooks. Like that was one escape. And so there might be fictional characters that I could relate with or want to be like, but as a child, not so much with the historical ones.
Madeline was my childhood book, like maybe that's why I love Paris.
Well, what about as you've kind of grown older? I think we go through college and we become have a greater sense of the world, and maybe look at people, and we start to see those qualities and characters too that we want to embody or emulate. I just wonder if you have, as you've gotten older, looked around and seen women or their stories maybe who have inspired you.
For me, there's three women particularly since coming to the turning point, actually, that I think now in my older years as an adult are who I now go to and turn to and think of for inspiration, or always want to talk to in that moment that I need advice, right? I mean, mentors, but more friends. And one of them was Robin Bowles. And for those people that have been around Collin County, they know Robin. I think she got Volunteer of the Year back in 2020 or something. And she was our first sexual assault nurse examiner program manager. And I'm gonna tell you, we butted heads in the beginning. Like I think several times she said she was gonna quit. She crying and crying. But we both had a singular purpose, and that was to help survivors, and we were passionate about it. And we were passionate, about providing, safe exams for them. She more than anybody. And so I made her a program manager. She always was doubtful, but she grew in that role, and she just inspired me because I've never, and anyone that knows Robin, her glass is not half full, it is always overflowing. And she can't be mad at anybody. And the few times that she's been disappointed by people, it's just, I mean, we all still joke, those of us that know us, if we think of someone that made us mad, or Robin would be, I was so disappointed. And she's just an inspiration every day. She left unexpectedly because of a daughter's accident. I know most people know that, a horrible emergency accident, and a medical emergency, and literally was gone out of our lives. I mean, I can remember the day, May 20th, 2020. And it was heartbreaking. And what she has just devoted her time to her daughter's rehabilitation and her family. And now she's living the life, she's moving to her dream home, and she stays connected. She's calling me about information. I think there's a SANE program here. I mean, she can't let it go, and so when I'm, really frustrated with something, especially work or even personally, she's who I want to call. And she really helped grounded me. Like I didn't even know if I wanted to keep doing this. I mean, secret be known, the first 2 years were really rough here. And I met her, and it just changed everything, just watching her devotion. And then, I would probably say you've met Gina Scarmella out of Boston. I met her at a national conference. And I think Gina really jump-started my desire to advocate and really work in the political area of advocating, working with legislation. And from what you do, she's so passionate about prevention work, and I was passionate about it but didn't know enough about it. And so she is a great resource for me, and was spent 25 years in the oldest rape crisis center in the country in Boston. And so I consider her a friend and an inspiration all the time. And I mean, I could go on. Jenny Black and Eloise House in Austin, we've become dear friends. She's a SANE nurse who worked with Robin to open our clinic. They did, but I was just around, and we've become dear friends. And I think what inspires me about her is when she's my age, and I'm not gonna say what that is, and we're of the age to have grandchildren and retire, and she's going back to school to be a nurse practitioner. I mean, how inspirational is that? I mean, that's crazy. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing. I guess I don't know, I'm full of fear about those things. But really, I know this is gonna sound kind of corny. I don't want it to sound insincere, but our agency is full of women, that are just inspirational every day. It's crazy that they choose to work in this mission and make life better for survivors and everything they do, whether it's education or social media, nurses, advocates, counselors. I mean, I think just walking through the turning point is what continues. Really, I know that sounds insincere, but I'm being really authentic about that. It's a great group of women.
Yeah. I think that's a beautiful thing, that each of us can have that perspective of, can we look around us and can we see that those lights of inspiration where we're at and the women around us, and then having those principles or those ideals. I love that image about her cup is overflowing, that, if you can find those qualities and recognize them and embrace them, like those are the things that really make lasting impressions on the people around you. So I guess this kind of flows into that. But as you've watched these women around you that have been inspiring to you, and whether it's their fearlessness or their passion or their compassion for others and devotion for serving our survivors here, what type of qualities or how do you think about your own impact as a woman on the people around you, and maybe even as a model for those around you?
I think all three of those women I mentioned, Gina, Robin, and Jenny, and so many of the women at the turning point, but those three in particular all share like these three qualities that I aspire to, and I'm not always. They are just all incredibly kind. They're just kind to everyone. They're kind and accepting. I mean, even, as Jimmy and I are working in the heat of the battle with one of our funding sources and getting all riled up, she just has a calmness and a kindness and an honesty about her that I think I'm drawn to those kind of women, because all three of them are that way. Gina's that way, Robin's that way. And I'm like, and that is kind of like my Aunt Jo and Scrappy. It's like, and I didn't even realize it till I was kind of looking at this, and I thought, I'm clearly drawn to people because I don't think I always have that. Like I want to, you know what I mean? I want to just be calm in the sea of the storm, and I want to be, always kind. I mean, I think I'm compassionate, but I want to be kind, and I believe I'm non-judgmental, but not really. I mean, like I judge stupid things like a driver. You think about judgment as people judging people that are, that are different, you that have different morals or values. But really, judgment is big, right? Like I judge people that are driving. They're idiots if they're not driving the right way, and they would never do that. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't come into their ethos, and so I just think that's kind of my guiding light, if that's what I'm drawn to, and that's what I aspire to be. And I just think that's what everybody, I mean, gosh, it would be such a better place, wouldn't it, if we all came out of that center of just kindness and honesty. That's part of it, and acceptance. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Wendy. I think that's a lot for us to think about, is how we can see our models, and then it can also give us something as individuals to aspire to. And I think that probably when we look at history and maybe the greater stories that are told about women, probably the biggest impact they have is actually those individual relationships where they've had these qualities that they've been able to share. Now, having not known famous historical people, I can't say that for sure, but I know certainly that those type of qualities that resonate with me are the people that I'm truly going to remember over time.
Yeah.
So in terms of women's history or inspiration, I wondered if you had any resources or thoughts, or when you're looking just to have that motivation, where you go to, if there's whether it's on social media and Instagram accounts or where you go to hear these.
You know me.
stories.
I'm on Instagram, social media. My biggest inspiration on Instagram is Doug the Pug. So I don't know if that's appropriate for Women's History Month, but yeah. No, I know what you're saying. I thought about that too. I think resources are really just the people that motivate me. I think of community people. I think of Jan Langbein, who, brought Genesis Women's Shelter up from nothing. She was a volunteer 25 years ago, and what she's created, and Lynn McLean at the Advocacy Center. I mean, I don't really have, I read stuff like Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle and, those kind of things. I love to read, but I think I'm most inspired by literature authors, that,
Yes.
right. And that tell real stories. And I always wished I could be a writer like that, but their real stories are coming from, I've read so many good books right now, I can't even think. And all of them have been by women authors. I kind of started looking at that, and I was looking, most of them have been anyway. And so, I don't know that there's all the research I do or online searches I do are usually about writing grants. I'm not spending a lot of time, I should. But I think as far as giving someone a resource, I just think for me, the best resource, there's just, I think there's a purpose for self-help books. Brene Brown's kind of like that, and Glennon Doyle, but I like to read their real stories. You know what I mean? Like what they overcame, like rather than telling me how to be something or how to look at something. And I'm inspired by those stories. If you read Educated or The Glass House or Castle, it's kind of like, wow, this woman went through that. That's crazy. It's crazy talk. And that's kind of my go-to is really talking to real people that have done what I want to do. And how did you do it? I listen to occasional YouTube about a strong woman. There was one I listen to a lot of podcasts. I was listening to a YouTube podcast, and my memory is so bad, Amy, but there was this Black woman in business, and she's the head of something. And I was trying to find it because I really think people should listen to it. It was a real inspiring podcast about a Black woman in corporate America. And her name is just escaping me, and everyone would know it. But and just her story of kind of how she approaches people and she was very business. This was, I don't know her, so I don't know if she's a kind person or an honest person. I think she probably is, but it was all about business, right? It was about how she coaches people. And it was just a very, very fresh approach. It was like, I don't sugarcoat things. I tell people the way it is. Don't cry when you come in here. And that's not popular in this day and age of self-care and being mindful of people's, work-life balance. But I feel that does people a disservice. And she said it in a kind way. It was very receptible. If that's even a word, you know what I mean? It wasn't, I don't think anyone hearing that would thought, gosh, what a, ice queen, or who wants to work for her. It was really inspiring the way she said that. So I'll have to send that out. It was really inspirational. So I do listen to those occasionally, but I still find myself coming back to, to hearing about real people who've overcome obstacles. And that means people in my own life too. I think of Robin. She's a great resource for anyone that has had to overcome probably the worst of experience you can have as a mother and a working woman at that time. She should write a book. It's an inspiration.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Wendy, for sharing your insights on women around you who've been inspiring for this Women's History Month. And I'm going to invite anybody who comes across this podcast or who comes across this YouTube video or on our Facebook Live to put in the comments of people who you find, women who you find inspiring. and it could be from history, it could be from your own social circle, but let's include the comments, and I'm curious to see, or if you have any other resources for women who have been inspiring.
Please.
So thank you all. We'll be back here next Tuesday. Bye-bye.
Bye.